Hi everyone, I'm Jim Arruda and I am the Associate Dean for the College of Health at the University of West Florida. But prior to that, I was a biological psychologist, kind of a physiological psychologist with a lot of expertise in cognitive neuroscience, but also neuropsychology. And so throughout my entire career, I've been very interested in brain-behavior relationships, and usually behaviors that are complex, neuropsychiatric disorders, for example. One of the things that I think I was a little bit surprised about with the film, just kind of getting back to the film for a second here, many of the people who were talking in that film were talking about a lot of the correlational kind of findings that they had, meaning that that a lack of education, that stress, seemed to impact all kinds of health-related outcomes. But one of the things that I was struck by was they never talked about the mechanism of stress within the nervous system and actually what it does, which can explain a lot of the findings. And so what I'd like to do is just describe just a little bit for you what that process is, because not only have you experienced it, but the children that we were looking at experience it, and they experience it chronically. And when that happens, it changes the brain. But the good news is that the brain can change back based upon the environment, based upon therapy, based upon a very supportive environment. One of the things you should know really about the nervous system, and a lot of people find it a little aversive to kind of listen to this sort of stuff, but I think it's interesting. I think it's going to make a lot of sense to you here. The lower parts of the brain are what we consider the most basic parts of the brain. They control a lot of our most basic motivations: anger, fear, anxiety. But above those areas, we have those higher areas which are responsible for thought, for reason, for planning, being able to empathize with others. And what we have found with research on stress, and I find this absolutely fascinating, but it makes complete sense, is that when somebody experiences stress, you included, if you had to come up here in front of everyone and you had to talk a little bit about yourself and you're an expert on yourself, the lower parts of your brain would trigger a fear response and anxiety that would then shut off the uppermost parts of your brain, your intellectual part of the brain, and you might not even remember your name. The reason for that is evolutionary. Those lower parts of the brain can keep you safe under very dangerous circumstances. And so it doesn't really make any sense for you to be intellectual, for you to have semantic associations between different topics that are necessary for conversation if you're being attacked by a tiger. And so what nature has done is it's enabled that lower part of the brain to disengage the upper part and to take over. And that's what you feel when your heart starts to beat, when you suddenly have no saliva in your mouth, and your voice is quivering, and you can't think because the lower parts have disconnected the upper parts, and you can't think when you're that nervous. That sort of acute response is very healthy. It's actually really good for the immune system, and it's certainly good when there's a tiger. The problem is, and this is what's really important, if somebody experiences chronic stress, this is something that we now know goes on in the brain. If somebody experiences chronic stress, like children, for example, those lower areas of the brain can disconnect the upper areas of the brain so often that it gets rewired. So that those lower parts have a lot more weight, especially with fear and anxiety, than the upper parts. Well, guess what happens to cognition under chronic stress? People who experience chronic stress can't perform cognitively very well. It's very hard to deal with that sort of information. The brain rewires itself as a result of that. And so a lot of the things they were telling you about, health, chronic stress reduces the immune response, Chronic stress results in the inability to attend, to be able to benefit from coursework. That's what's going on in those individuals because we're not made to have chronic stress. Acute stress is fantastic. It really does make the immune system strong, and it allows us to learn adaptive methods in the future, but not chronic stress. The other thing I want to mention, we're talking about children, and I think everyone's probably coming away with the idea that, oh, human beings, my God, we're so fragile. But we were talking about children here. All the research on adults suggests that adults are very resilient. That about 95% of adults don't experience any sort of adverse reaction weeks, months later after some sort of not chronic exposure to stress, but acute. And so there were some things that I thought were a little bit confounded within that video, and I wanted to make sure that people understood that resiliency is something that certainly adults have, most adults have. Not everyone has it. And it's biological. There are neurochemicals associated with it. There are predispositions, and those predispositions work with environmental triggers. I hope this is making sense to everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.